Welcome to the AI Tsunami, folks. This is the inaugural event with Jonathan from Cohere, and I'm here to introduce the esteemed hosts, Nicholas Darbo-Garno and David Beatty. I'm David Beatty's marketing manager. My name is Quinn Lawson, and David, take it away.
Thanks very much, Quinn, and welcome everybody to the first of a series of podcasts that attempt to demystify this magic enterprise known as generative AI. And as a prelude to that, let me just show you a couple of slides that I've put together. We were hunter-gatherers for several million years, and then for several thousand years, we were agriculturalists. We followed that with the industrial age, the third age, which we've been in for a couple of centuries, and the information age, which we've been in for a couple of decades, and now we're about to get into what is called the augmentation age. We're just emerging. This takes us from passive tools like a little cutter from the Stone Age into things that are generative. Things will be additive to your mental capacity, giving you new ideas and creativity. This has never happened before. And as Nick will show you, cognitive augmentation is growing exponentially. And as he points out, this is on an exponential scale. I still don't understand it, Nick, but an exponential of an exponential in terms of the pace and speed of increase of capacity. Nick thinks of these as three kinds of AI: computational AI, which is crunching the data; superhuman math, almost always; generative AI, that's what we're going to talk about these next few series, up to a 50% productivity gain, as well as almost infinite creativity potential. And finally, sensory. So it's a real extinction event. If you don't get started on this, there's only one question left to be asked, and that is, where do I want to be buried? You got to get going on this or you're done. So Nick, over to you.
All right, Professor Beatty. Hi, everybody. I see quite a few names in the list of attendees that I recognize. So thank you for joining. I have a simple job today, which is to introduce Jonathan and then peppering him with tough questions. Please start asking your questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to also use those as we go along. Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give a brief introduction. Jonathan works at Cohere, which is one of the most important companies in AI. As a matter of fact, founded by one of the gentlemen who invented generative AI, one at Google. Jonathan is the director of product strategy, so he's deep into what's happening, the latest in AI. He's also worked with a number of companies on implementing these strategies, how to, what to do and what not to do. Before becoming an AI strategist, he was, and let's not hold us against him, but he was an attorney. He went to Harvard Law School, and as well, he's got a McKinsey consulting background. So, very accomplished, very thoughtful. Jonathan, please take it away and take us through what's happening in AI and how companies should think about it.
Nick, thank you so much for the intro. So excited to be here with you all today talking about AI. What we're going to do is we're going to dive into the technology and do a bit of a primer on what the technology is. Then we'll look at how it's evolving. And we'll wrap up by focusing on what you should be doing, and I think what you need to be doing in order not to be asking the question of where you want to be buried, but hopefully looking at actually really how can you win? How can you drive your business forward and your organization forward with this technology? And so with that, I'm going to share my screen and present some slides. And if you're able to share in the chat, I'm going to try to make this interactive, but I'm not sure that the chat will enable that. So feel free to use the Q&A, and we'll engage with you as this goes. But Nick and David, I might throw some questions your ways if the chat is if the chat isn't cooperating. And so I'm going to start off with a question for everybody that I want everybody here to think about. It's the late 90s. You're advising execs and board members about how to win in the age of the internet. And I want to know, what advice would you give them? And so everyone, I'm going to ask that you take like 20 quiet seconds and think through, what advice would you give to execs and board members in the late 90s about how to win in the age of the internet? And if you have responses, you can share them in the Q&A or in the chat. And then Nick and David, I'm actually going to open this one up to you to to get a little bit of your thoughts on what you would advise, not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, look, as people start thinking about this, I was, at Google, Montreal, in those days, and advising executives. And here's, a quote I'll never forget from the CEO of a retailer. No, Canadians don't want to shop online, right? And my answer was, is it because Canadians don't want to shop online, or is it because your internet site sucks, right? So, and then, of course, Canadians being Canadians, not much happening in e-commerce for quite a while in Canada. Canada was far behind the US. And Amazon enters Canada, and e-commerce starts growing 50% year on year. So the advice I gave people in e-commerce was, whatever it is that you do, just follow what the customers really want as opposed to what you think they want.
Yeah, I deemed it as a curiosity. I was in on half a dozen boards of directors, and I don't think anybody took it seriously at all, Jonathan. It was sort of an interesting thing that your kids were working on. But did it have any relevance for your business, your industry? Not that I can remember.
So I appreciate those answers, Nick. I thought you were going to say just invest in Google. I thought that was going to be the clear, quick, and easy advice.
Buy more ads, buy ads. And so we get some answers already, by the way, in the Q&A. We've got hire the best. I think it's brilliant advice. We've got, partner with experts. We've got, really imagine the full potential. We've got Monica. Hi, Monica. How are you? Like, test it out, experiment, right? And then Dan, who's let's start, educating your staff early on. So great suggestions.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are fantastic. So I want to come back to this towards the end of the session. So I'm gonna put this in the parking lot, but Nick and David, thanks for engaging here. And I just want to note that we're in this moment where a new technology is changing the world. And we've seen this happen before. Feels like it happens almost every 15 years right now. Where in 93 we had the web browser. And you don't need to hear from me the impact that had on our lives, whether professionally or personally. And then in 2007, we had mobile apps. And then in 2022, there was this moment where the world changed. The world was introduced to chat, generative AI chat, with the release of ChatGPT. And since then, we've seen this, what Nick and David are calling the AI tsunami that has happened since then, which is just totally taking over, but we're still in the early wave of that tsunami. And so what we're going to do is dive into now a bit of how the tech works, and then we'll explore where that wave is going. And so the way these models work, these generative AI models, they predict the next token in a sequence. Let's make that even simpler. They predict the next word in a sequence. That's what these models do. These incredibly high, powerful, magical seeming models, they're predicting the next word in a sequence. And so I want to actually practice this with you. Nick, I'm gonna turn to you on this one. AI will you predict just the next single word here?
Help.
And then what comes after that?
The world be more productive.
Amazing. AI will help the world be more productive. And so what Nick just did is Nick just did his best impersonation of a generative AI model, where he predicted the next word in a sequence. And then after one more word was generated, so he said, AI will, now I'm losing exactly what Nick said, but each word informed
the world be more productive.
Help the world be more productive. So after help, that informed predicting what the next word was. And these models are trained on incredible amounts of data to enable them to very accurately predict what the next word will be. And so we could do this with another example where the Toronto Blue Jays are, and if this was me as a big Blue Jays fan, I would say perpetually. And then after that, I would say disappointing. And I get the Toronto Blue Jays are perpetually disappointing, but nonetheless, I love them and I cheer for them. And so that is really the foundation of how these models work. They're trained on tons of text, and they're able to predict the word or the token that comes next. And now, while that sounds a little bit like Mad Libs, it actually can be incredibly impactful and incredibly useful when the models are prompted with the right information to continue to fill out and generate what comes next. And so we're going to dive into an example here. And what I'm showing you here is the user interface for Cohere's chat model. And so I'm going to write a message here, and I'm going to click send, and Cohere's generative AI model is going to respond by generating what comes next. And so I'm going to say, write a blog post about why someone should move to Toronto. And as you can see, between the Blue Jays fandom and encouraging people to move, I like the city. And so I get this blog post that is, Toronto is an amazing city, and lists out reasons. But what did I say? I said I wanted a blog post, right? So now I'm going to say, make it less of a list. I don't want a list. I want paragraphs and sentences. And so all I need to do is give it an instruction, and then it sees what came before it. So the model's context that it's able to take in is my initial instruction, what it generated. And then I say, make it less of a list. And if you were engaging with this, you would take in what came before it, and you'd generate your own, you'd write an output that corresponds with the instruction. And that's what I get from the model. So it takes in the context of what came before and then generates an output from it. And what I could do now that I have here is say, draft a text message to my sister saying to move here. Now, if you notice, I said saying to move here. I didn't say saying to move to Toronto. But the same way that you all understood that I was referring to Toronto, so too is the model able to take in the context and then generate what comes next. And I get this text message to my sister with a few emojis at the end. So I'm going to bring us back to the slides, but really I want to start giving you a sense of how these models work and how you can give them instructions and have them then complete tasks. And actually, maybe I'll show you one more that's a little bit more business oriented, where I'm going to give the model instruction to summarize a transcript in 4 bullet points. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the customer support industry, but we've got these agents who talk to people. And then after they get off a call, they need to summarize the transcript. And for customer support agents, they hate doing it. It takes a while. They don't enjoy doing it. They just had this 30-minute call. And so I'm going to feed the model a support transcript between a customer and a food for you support representative. Think about this as a Uber Eats, DoorDash type of representative. And the customer is upset because the food arrived 80 minutes late. And there's this whole back and forth between the customer and the representative. And I'm not going to bore you by reading it to you. That's why these models are helpful. I just say, give me 4 bullet points. And I get a summary of the transcript in 4 bullet points. We start off with the customer being dissatisfied, complaining about how long it took. The rep looks into it, offers a $10 coupon. The customer takes it, but says they want even more. And the rep offers an additional $10 and that resolves it. And so the beauty of this goes beyond just persuading family members to move to the cities that we live in. And what I'd encourage you to think about is, how can you take this technology and incorporate it into every business process that you have? Where can you save time? Where can you remove the parts of the jobs for your colleagues and your employees that they don't want to be doing and make it happen that quickly? If I had to summarize that transcript, it probably would have taken me 10 minutes. But for the model, it did it in a split second. And that is, I think, a ton of the value that this is bringing already and immediately to businesses, is incorporating this technology into business processes to remove parts of the job that are expensive, that people don't like doing, and making them seamless. So, Professor Beatty, I'm going to ask you to be a large language model for me for a moment here. And I'm going to ask you to fill in that next word. How would you complete this sentence? Generative language models are
hugely productive in terms of managing complex data sets.
I love it. I think that's absolutely accurate. They're hugely productive at managing complex data sets. You can feed them tons of information. But Professor Beatty, you're far more positive than I want to be right now. I'm going to be a little more negative. This is how I would finish the sentence. They're know-it-alls.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
I don't know about the two of you or for all of those of you who are tuning into this webinar, but I know people who are know-it-alls. And when I ask them a question, I get a response.
Yeah.
That sounds confident, sounds like it's right. But when you're dealing with a know-it-all, you really don't know if it's right or not. You have to go and validate and verify. And so while generative language models are massively productive and can handle tons of data, they're also know-it-alls. And so I'm going to bring us back to the demos, and I'm going to show you an example of that. Professor Beatty, Nick, did either of you watch the Grammys?
No.
I did. It was really a moving performance from Tracy Chapman, and I forget the name of the gentleman she sang with, but it was amazing.
Yeah, with Luke Combs. So they performed Fast Car. It was phenomenal. And so I'm going to ask our generative model, when was the most recent time Tracy Chapman performed Fast Car live? And as Nick just told us, the answer should be like within the last week. Now, the model sounds confident. There's no uncertainty, but here's the problem. This is wrong. I don't even know if there was a greatest hits tour in 2022. And so one of the challenges with these models is they're trained to predict the next word in a sequence. And they've seen tons of data that informs that generation. And based on what they've seen, they say this is the most likely next word in the sequence, and they fill it in. And sometimes, like when you're summarizing a customer support transcript, it's massively helpful. But other times, when you ask it a question, it might not have information that's up to date, or might just get it wrong. And I would have no way of knowing that had I also not watched the Grammys. And so the question then for us is, what do we do about that? I don't know about you, but accuracy feels important. It's important in the work product that we put out, and it's certainly important with AI models. And David, I'm seeing you come off mute, so I'm curious what's on your mind.
Well, I was thinking about biases and hallucinations. I think Nick does a piece where he asked that, show me 10 pictures of police people, and they're all men. Show me 10 pictures of a nurse, and they're all women. So these inbuilt biases, you've got to make darn sure that you understand them before you let this loose in a wider population.
I think it's a great point. And David, what this gets to in my mind, as we're thinking about for our business, how we adopt this technology, how do you evaluate the model on your use case? So there are tons of evaluations for models on different tasks. What matters for you is the use case that you're adopting it for. And how do you set up a rigorous set of evaluations and then build the muscle around doing this again, and again, in order to be aware of what the model could output in your context. I think it's a super helpful point. And I have a little exercise that I love doing.
Tanya on the Q&A is asking also about privacy concerns. You've got hallucinations, right? The model wrong. You've got biases, the model, doing things that are, not ethical or not right from a societal perspective. But you also have privacy concerns. Can you speak to those privacy concerns a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for flagging the Q&A. And folks, please throw your questions into the Q&A. We want to make sure we're addressing what matters most to you. As we think about privacy concerns, you need to be thoughtful around where the model sits that you're sending information to and what the policies are of the model provider who is serving that model to you. And when this all started, people were consuming from model providers, think about ChatGPT, you're just sending your data to OpenAI, and then they would send you the model response back. Over time, deployment mechanisms have gotten far more sophisticated. And so model providers have APIs. Cloud providers are now offering managed services of these models. So if you're using AWS, you can use AWS Bedrock. The data that you send is sent to AWS. It's not sent to the model provider. Or you can even deploy these models privately in your own environment. And so we've seen a dramatic sophistication in terms of the types of deployments that are available. But now you'll also get model providers who agree not to train on your data. And that's an evolution as well. Now, you need to read the fine print. You need to know what's going on. You need to be thoughtful around how am I consuming this technology? Who am I sending my data to and what might they be doing? But there are now deployment mechanisms that address, I would say, at least 99.99% of security concerns that are out there. You just need to make sure that you're consuming it in the right fashion. So if you have somebody on your team who says, we can't use that, period, because it's not secure, I would push back gently and respectfully and talk about the different ways that you might be able to consume it and clarify if there's no way that meets your security needs or if it's just not the way that people have been thinking about.
And Jonathan, conversely, right? I mean, there's a study that I saw 2 weeks ago. If you just let your employees use, like a ChatGPT, for example, that's just the open ChatGPT. I don't know, many people don't realize this, but the information you put in there is now in there forever for anybody to see. And 11% of what employees are putting into ChatGPT today is confidential information, right? So if have somebody who's writing the next earnings release for a public company, right, and they do it like 2 weeks before the earnings call, but it's actually now in ChatGPT, and people can find out, your earnings before they get released, right? So, you need, to your point, to work with, these model providers directly and create your own version of it, not use a public one.
Yeah, and I think we hear the horror stories, and that can turn people off. But I would say it's a push to be thoughtful, to be rigorous, and be disciplined in where you're consuming from. But shouldn't be the thing that stops you from consuming altogether. And I'm seeing a question in the chat around from Clovis on, can you speak more to where the systems are finding the information? And so in the example that I showed you, the system is generating from everything that it's seen. But there's a little exercise that I'm going to do, and I see the chat is now active, so I'm going to do it with everybody. I'm going to ask people, what is the temperature in Sudbury, Ontario right now? This is an exercise that I love doing because I think it addresses, Clovis, your question actually directly. So I'm going to ask people to share in the chat what the temperature in Sudbury, Ontario is right now. Nick is giving us very, very cold, which is probably accurate. And then Gabriel and Jennifer, I'm seeing 3 degrees and +2. And my hunch is that you probably both looked it up and saw just from a different source. But Nick, if I were to ask you to look this up and make sure you're getting me the right answer, what would you do?
I just go to Google and ask the question, and they would come up with probably the right data.
Exactly. So what Nick would do is something that I think all of us have learned to do, which is when we don't know the answer to a question, we go look it up in a data source that we think might have the right answer. We interpret the data that we see there. We take that in, and then we provide the answer. In Nick's case, this would be Google typing in Sudbury weather, getting the information and sharing it with this group. Now, that is very different than the know-it-all approach. The know-it-all approach, you just give an answer. And so one of the most critical evolutions for these models, I'd say in 2023, was what we call retrieval augmented generation. And retrieval augmented generation, I'm going to jump forward here. The way it works is it does exactly what Nick just described. And so what Nick described is going and finding information. We're connecting models to data sources to enable retrieval to happen, to find relevant information, and then inform the generation of a model. And so when I ask a question to a model that is connected to a data source, I ask a question and then I see a response. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like. And I'm going to ask the exact same question. So I'm going to copy it from here. And I'm going to ask the exact same question I asked earlier. And if you recall, we got the wrong answer. But now there's a very important difference. This is being grounded on the web. So when I ask a question, the model is going to go kick off a web search, find relevant information, and then generate the response. So the model's searching, and I get the response, which is Tracy Chapman performed Fast Car live for the first time in years at the 2024 Grammys on February 4th. She performed the song with Luke Combs. And what I see highlighted, these are actual citations. So I can see where the information came from. And if I wanted to, I could go click through to that data source. Now, that is a far more valuable output for me than it was just a few minutes ago when I just asked the model and it generated a response. And this is the concept behind retrieval augmented generation. We're setting up systems that enable models to do what we do already today. We look up information, we generate responses. And in Professor Beatty's class, I'm going to assume that people have to cite where their data comes from when they're submitting papers. And so too, we've got our models citing where information comes from here.
So Jonathan, in the
so,
case of an enterprise, right, if you're in a company, you can, take all of your documents, for example, and put a kind of traditional search engine on top of it, and then put, a generative AI engine to summarize it all, right? Is that, when you think of RAG, is it the combination of more traditional search with kind of generative AI? Do those two things have to happen?
yeah, so I think that's exactly right. And that's the use case that we're really excited about, is bringing this not just to the internet, but to your internal documents, your workspace documents. And you can use traditional search. We would encourage you to use semantic search or embedding-based search to improve your search results, because the same way when you have an analyst who goes and writes up a report, their report is only as good as the information they find. One of the key pieces for these retrieval augmented generation solutions is how good is your retrieval. And so the way the system works for the users, what we just saw was I asked a question and I saw a response with citations. But first, what the model did is it generated a search query based on what I had asked. It then retrieved relevant documents related to that search query. The generative model was, the documents were shared with the generative model, and it was prompted saying, here's relevant information about the search query, generate a response. And then the model goes and generates the response. And so for the user, it feels like magic, right? Boom, there it is, a response to my questions. And Nick, to your point, imagine being able to say, how much should revenue grow for our company in Q3 last year? And what were the main drivers of revenue? That arguably is more helpful than the question I asked for us in our day-to-day. But what we're not seeing behind the scenes is that there's a pipeline being set up that enables this to occur, and ideally to occur reliably. So why RAG? Why does RAG matter? The first is it minimizes hallucinations.
Hey, Jonathan, quick, there's a couple of questions in the chat that I think are relevant. Jennifer talks about how her husband wrote a mission statement for his search and rescue team. And then next thing you know, like Google Bard was writing something that was very, very similar. And there was another question as well about, copyright. So, there's a lawsuit from the New York Times, for example, and other lawsuits. So how do we think about who owns the content? How do we think about, if I'm a company and I'm going to use, one of these RAG models, how do I not get sued? Like, how do I manage that issue?
Yeah, so these are two great questions. Let me start with the second question. So the concern that Nick's mentioning is, hey, if I use a model and it generates copyrighted outputs, am I at risk of being sued? Now, a lot of large language model providers and serving platforms over the last, I'd say, number of months have rolled out policies where they're indemnifying around third-party copyright infringement claims. And so I'd say that is increasingly becoming the norm. Now, at Cohere, we have something similar for enterprises. And so we see this happening sort of across industry. And I think it addresses what is a concern, which is, if the model is going to generate something, am I liable? Am I at risk of being sued? And so that New York Times lawsuit, I believe, against OpenAI is against the model provider. And many model providers now offer third-party indemnifications against copyright infringement lawsuits. Now, again, as you think about what model you're using, what serving platform you're using, this is something to check in on. You want to make sure that you are getting this and that you are being protected in the ways that you need. But Jennifer, you're describing something that's a little bit different and feels, maybe eerie is an understatement, but let's call it eerie, which is your husband wrote something and it shows up when somebody asks Bard to write something else. I can't speak for Google's products here, but I'll say that as a whole, the industry, many model providers are providing opt-outs for your data being included in training. And so if the option when you're using their model is the data that you're sending them at risk of being used in training that model, which means it could then be used for a later iteration of the model to generate outputs. At Cohere, for example, we enable all of our users just to opt out of that. And so you can just select that won't happen. But as you think about this from an enterprise context, sometimes you say, okay, well, great that you're promising not to use my data for training, but we don't want to send our data outside of the cloud, or we don't want to send our data outside of our VPC. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there are different deployment methods that actually completely restrict the model provider, even if they wanted to, from being able to see what you're sending in and out of the model.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as you think about private VPC deployments, that tends to mitigate concerns around what the model providers are able to see. But generally, you should have the option with most model providers just to opt out of your data being used in training.
So, Jonathan, what I'm hearing you say, and maybe that's what you have on your next slide, but all of us have heard concerns around these models, around accuracy, around copyright, around a number of other issues, but nothing ever being perfect, and certainly it's not clear in real life if you can really be protected from a lawsuit if you get indemnity from somebody else, as somebody made the point in the chat. But what I'm hearing you say is that these issues, while important, should not let a company kind of not begin on their journey on AI, because while they're certainly not, fully solved, they seem to be manageable at this point.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's a succinct way of putting it. And I would add that everything we do as a business, we entail some type of risk. There's something that comes along with it. Now, there's a lot that we can do to minimize risk. And some of the concerns that we've spoken about, I really believe are practically minimizable. And so if we let those risks make us sort of put our heads in the sand and say, we're not touching this technology for another year, we're actually taking on a much bigger risk. And David, to your point, to start it off, I'd call it an existential risk for many businesses if we don't actually go ahead and adopt this technology. And so why RAG, just to sort of summarize this piece on RAG, why it's important is it does minimize hallucinations. It makes it easier to validate information that you're getting, and it enables up-to-date generations. So you no longer have to rely on when the model was last trained in order to get that information.
Can I do that on ChatGPT myself at home, or do I need a special program to help me do a RAG?
So it's a great question, David. I'd actually encourage you to come to Cohere. You can open an account for free,
Okay.
and you'll be able to do it.
Yeah.
It's actually as simple as you click the grounding tab over here.
Yeah.
And you just click web search on or off,
Okay.
and that enables grounding.
Okay.
Now,
super. Thank you.
what you can see down here is internally at Cohere, we've set this up on our internal documents. So our Google Drive, our Notion, our Slack. So I'm actually able to query for myself across our internal documents. Now that might be a little bit more labor intensive for you to set up, but the web search you can get going in, I would say you can probably get it going in as little as 2 minutes. We're not the only model provider that offers this, so there are similar capabilities with ChatGPT around grounding as well.
Yeah.
So you can find that in other places as well. So where do these models go from here? If I said that RAG was sort of the massive evolution in 2023, what does the future hold? Well, one piece is answering multi-step questions. So questions that require answering sub-questions in order to get to the answer. So if I say, which of the following products should we invest in Q2 of this year? There are sub-questions that we need to answer, which is, what is the state of the products? What was revenue growth for each of the products? What are the risks with each of these products before you can get to that final recommendation? So increasingly, models are able to complete more robust analysis and logic and answer multi-step questions. The other thing that models are now increasingly able to do by being set up in the right way is trigger actions. So I asked the model earlier to draft a text message to my sister. What would be nicer than saying draft a text message to my sister is saying send the text message, and not having to copy it and paste it into iMessage and sending that to my sister. In the same way that I showed you how models are being incorporated as parts of broader systems to be more impactful with retrieval augmented generation, the same way they can be set up as part of larger pipelines that can enable action taking. And that will lead to, I'd say, the increase in how useful these models are and the transformation that we're going to see. So I want to I sort of mentioned that I would talk about trends and what it means for you. And so I want to wrap quickly with what these trends are and sort of my encouragement for all of you to drive this forward with your business. The first is that we're going to see AI in all applications. There are going to be no software applications that don't have AI as part of them. And there's a meaningful first mover advantage. But just to drive this point home, I have a Whoop. This is a health tracker. It tells me how much I slept and what my heart rate is. I got this about 40 days ago. And when I was onboarding with it, I used the feature called the Whoop Coach, which is a generative AI powered coach that actually helped me understand what I was looking at. To me, like HRV and all of the different metrics that it gives me, it was honestly just a little too confusing for me. But by using this, I was able to onboard onto the platform so much quicker. Now, if it's useful for the health tracker around my wrist, I'd encourage you to think it's useful for a lot more. And so I think we're going to see this in all applications. The second is we're moving from the realm of magic to mundane. My grandmother, when I hop on a video call with her, it still feels magic to her. But for me, I could do without video calls. It's mundane. It's part of my job. It's part of the day-to-day. And what I expect out of my video call technology has gone up, 100-fold. And so consumer expectations are going to change as this moves from the realm of magic to the realm of mundane. And the final piece is, for all of us who are on this podcast or webinar today, who are knowledge workers, our work will be transformed. I cannot imagine doing my job without Google search. I cannot imagine doing my job without the internet. And I think in a couple short years, all knowledge workers won't imagine being able to do their job without generative AI tooling. And so these are three, I think, really critical trends that are already underway in our space. And what that leads to is the so what, which is what should you do? The first is you need to build the muscle. You can't take a bank from 1995, drop them into 2024, and expect that that same year they're going to have a mobile app that their customers like using. Because it actually takes building a muscle to learn how to build products with given sets of technology. And for us as individuals, whether you're a board member, whether you're an exec, whether you're a leader at a company, you need to play around with this technology because you need to understand what it can do. You wouldn't be effective in your role if you never used the internet, leading a company in the age of the internet. The same way is true in the age of AI. And so, Professor Beatty, I love your question of, can I go and do this? Because on the personal level, all of us need to go and do this and engage with this technology. And then at the organization level, we need to start building products, if not yesterday, then today.
On that one, Jonathan, there's a number of classes on Coursera or other platforms about prompt engineering, like how do you talk to these models in a way that gives you, much, much better answers. I took a number of those classes and they were just a revolution. Like I can now, work with Cohere in a, right, or OpenAI or Google's, Gemini in a much more thoughtful way. And it just took a few hours. So my productivity, I give these models huge data streams, for example, and ask it to create chart. I would really encourage people to obviously, play with these models, but also become much more conversant in how to optimize, what you ask them to do, because, garbage in, garbage out, right? The more thoughtful you are about the questions you ask, the answers are much, much, much better.
It's a fantastic call, and I'll give everybody credit for being here today. Like this is the first step, and there's lots of education resources that you can access, which will help you understand this technology and learn how to engage with it. And I think being here at this session might not be the first step of your journey, or it is the first step, but it really is part of it. And Nick, as you mentioned, finding resources that will help you on teaching you how to engage with the model will be fantastic. And going and messing around and finding out where it works and where it doesn't will be valuable alongside that. The second thing that I want to encourage you to do is diversify your bets. So you really need to be building with this technology at the organization level. Now, a year ago, I would have said, listen, take something super low risk. It doesn't matter if it's helpful or not, and just start building a product. Because what's key is that you're building the muscle. I'd say that there are people who are moving forward very quickly here. And so what I would encourage you is start building the muscle. It's not too late. But then when you're building products at your company, you should build some products that are super easy. You know they're going to work. It's almost a guarantee it's going to come online. And then also take some big shots, because the size of the prize with generative AI, and for those who win in this space, is massive. And so I would say diversify your bets as you think about the products that you're building. Some which might be easier to get online, of lower value, might not be transformative. And then at the same time, start taking some moonshots for what could actually really transform your business.
And Jonathan, on that one, just a study came out about 2 months ago from Harvard Business School. They worked with BCG, the consulting firm, and they split the consultants into an AI group, a non-AI group. And this is a double-blind study, right? So nobody knew what was happening in terms of who was who. But Harvard Business School, quantified the work before and quantified the work after, and they found that the AI group did 12% more work in 25% less time, and the work was a 40% improved quality. If you kind of multiply that out, it's a 90% improvement in productivity, right, for a very complex white collar work, which is consulting. So certainly not suggesting that every company will get a 90% lift, but this is the first time I saw a real quantification of the potential impact of the productivity of these types of models.
It's a great example. And Nick, I think that study was done before retrieval augmented generation was incorporated too. And so already we're seeing this type of impact, and the technology is speeding forward. And the last thing I'm going to say is set a date. You need to set a date. If you're going to be building something, this isn't, oh, we're going to build it in Q1 and Q2 and we're going to see what happens. It's on April 3rd, this is going to be live in production. We will figure out how we get there. The enterprise partners that we work with that are bringing dozens of use cases to productions are the ones that are most rigorous on setting a date for when those applications, when those use cases will be live, and then moving mountains if need be to get there.
Does that mean, Jonathan, that the metric of Silicon Valley, fail fast, fail often, fail forward, holds in a company as well? What about the risk side of that? You get something out there that's sort of okay, but it destroys your reputation because it's not perfectly okay.
Yeah, so I'd say it's the perfect tee up, which is in the theory of just like, let's just go and not worry about what's happening, because you need to make sure your data is secure. So that's like the first piece that I'd say is, alongside these three things that I recommend that you do, make sure your data is secure. And I think you can securely access these models, or I'd say just you can securely access these models. And so make sure you're consuming them in the right way. But Professor Beatty, to your question, I would say don't sacrifice on standards. But historically, AI has been the domain of corporate research, which have much longer timeframes, and their feet aren't held to the fire the same way that product organizations are. And so don't go live just because you have the date, but the people who are building should feel very responsible for meeting a quality bar at that time. And what goes along with all of these three is the more thoughtful you come around evaluations and how you evaluate model performance across a broad swath of use cases, the easier it will be for you to make that determination. This is ready, this can go live, the risks are mitigated or managed.
Yeah, I love these three things. And then the bottom one, I maybe broaden the bottom one a little bit, which is data is one thing, but I just kind of, from a kind of full governance and policies and legal issues, we're going to have somebody, on February 22nd, who's an expert at the legal concerns, the governance concerns, the policy concerns, and the data concerns around AI. So join our second, event, and then we'll go deeper into, there are real issues here to be concerned about, but we'll dive into how to manage them even more, because I know there were more questions about, privacy, security. There were more questions around, the risks of, copyright. So we'll address those in detail in our next session on Feb 22nd. So a question for you on this, right? So I completely agree with you. Diversify your bets, right? Get started, put a date. Listen, you've worked with a lot of companies who have done this successfully. You've worked with companies who have tried and failed. What's the difference? Like, what are the 2 or 3 things you notice between, like, wow, this project worked versus this one failed?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And so I think one piece of the difference is whether this is treated as like a side project or this is mission critical. Um, for those that are just like they're tourists in the space, they want to see what's there, but they don't really see this as theirs. That leads to projects taking a long time, people being pulled off into different projects, things getting stalled, and then it doesn't get anywhere. I would treat this not like a tourist, but like this is the core of your company. Um, and we saw it in the age of the internet. Those that moved first ended up winning. And if you were a fast follower, you had to follow. I think McKinsey had some research that it was within 9 months in terms of fast following. And what we're seeing with AI is that that's expected to expedite dramatically. So there's a massive first mover advantage. And if you're going to be a follower, you got to be extremely, extremely, extremely fast. And so, like I'd say the number one thing is this the core? Do you treat this like it is a top priority? Or is this something really interesting that you want to allocate more resources to? You know you should, and maybe we'll do it next quarter.
So on that, right? So we have a number of senior execs on the call. We have some board members on the call. These folks are not going to be the ones implementing these strategies, but what role can they play to influence this idea that this is taken as a mission critical priority? What can senior execs and board members do to make sure that happens?
Yeah, so I think there's probably three things that come to mind for me. The first is around talent and a talent strategy. You should be talking with your execs around how your talent strategy is evolving, given the importance of generative AI. So talent is a critical piece. The second is use cases. I would want to know from your leadership teams which use cases they believe will be most critical for their organizations and how they're working against them. As the board member, it's not necessarily your job to come up with that, but you need to be holding your executive leadership team to account on that. And then the final piece is around governance, whether it's security or risk mitigation. And I think on the next webinar, you'll dive in great depth and detail into this. So I will stay a little bit further away from it, but just to say that you should think about the risks that are there for your business.
Yeah, if you push a little bit on the second point, which is the use cases, right? And then so I would actually even say that, I'm on a board of 4 companies, and I think board members should understand what the top use cases are in their industry. And by the way, if you're on the board of a company in Canada, for instance, not what's happening in Canada, right? Well, what's happening in Canada and the US and the UK and China. But by the way, and Jennifer asked this question, she's in the mining sector. What's an example of an AI product? Look, I can give you a few examples, but Cohere can give you better answers, right? So before I have a meeting with the board, by the way, and David and I have a lot of board meetings to help senior execs get started. We had a board meeting with a transportation company, and I don't know that sector very well. Within 15 minutes, using Cohere, right, and other tools, we had, for whatever reason, by the way, it seems that when a company has amazing success in AI, they publicize it a lot. So this stuff is all public, right? So Jennifer, in the mining sector, there's a whole bunch of really cool things around exploration, right? Cobalt metals, for example, is using AI to improve exploration. And then in terms of operational efficiency, there's a whole bunch of articles. There's an article from McKinsey about how they worked, in a mine in Baghdad, Arizona, and improve the efficiency of the mine by 15% using a whole bunch of cool AI stuff. So this stuff is all public. Like, it's just like you're a quick search away, using Cohere, from finding the top 20 use cases in your industry. And my advice, by the way, would be, from whether it's a board or senior execs, when you're trying to figure out the list of the use cases, just pick one that's already been done, already been successful, already passed the test of time. The company did it. They saw success. They made it public. They haven't got any backlash from a PR perspective. They haven't gotten sued. So it's a more bounded, like, something's already happened that's working, right? So as opposed to creating a new use case from scratch that may have more risks down the road as well.
It's a great point. And just on Jennifer, to your question, one that I get excited about, which I think is relevant in the mining sector, I also hear from retailers, is we give our employees lots of manuals. There's lots of information for them about what they need to do, and if this event happens, what they do. But they're really dense and it's hard to find information in them. can we enable our employees? And this is true for employees in back offices and also for employees who are hands-on, to actually be able just to ask questions and get answers generated from those manuals. And so as I think about mining, that's one that I think is relevant and will make people's lives better. Hopefully will improve safety as well. And then there's just the whole host of, back office tasks that this is very ripe for adopting AI.
Yeah,
I'm going.
I like to jump forward and give an example because I'm still more struck by, if you don't get started on this, the only question you've got left is, where do I want to be buried? We took a look, Nick and I, at John Deere. And you think about John Deere, yeah, makes tractors. What color are they? Green. No, John Deere is today in the farm profitability business. It now knows every single plant in your field by name, whether it needs more water, more fertilizer, more pesticide. And it's really a software as a service company that happens as well to use a tractor to get the information. So if you're Kubota, and John Deere has 33 new ventures starting up around every single aspect of their business, completely reoriented the company under the leadership of the CEO. If you're a sort of a tractor company, you're dead, aren't you, Nick? I mean, there's no way that a farmer would not buy a John Deere if it's going to increase his farm profit by 300% versus a Kubota or something else.
Well, that's the for me, like, having been in technology my entire life and seeing the web wave, seeing the mobile wave, and now this third wave of technology. All these waves have been impactful, but in this wave, I've seen things like a car insurance company tripling the accuracy of its risk forecasting. Your example on John Deere, right? That technology that they bought from Blue River reduces the use of water and pesticide by 90%, right? And the things that Jonathan is talking about, as we saw from the Harvard Business case study and in BCG, improves productivity by up to 90%. So these numbers are so big that yes, right. If you're a laggard, and I don't think anybody. I think there's one competitor in the precision agriculture that is kind of caught up to John Deere, but I think the others are in big trouble. And I think as you build the muscle, back to Jonathan's point, if you build the muscle and the muscle gets stronger and stronger, and you move faster and faster every day, and somebody starts a year behind you, but you're actually ahead and you're running faster, right? They don't catch you. But Jonathan, I know we're almost at time. One more question for you, because you've had the privilege of working with companies in Europe, in the US and Canada. How different are these companies, or are US companies ahead, are Canadians behind, are Europeans behind? And what is it about those companies that are ahead, and in terms of their mindset and their approach to this? So from a country perspective, how do you think about it?
Yeah, and so first off, I'd say that maybe John Deere's new slogan should be "Nothing runs like a deer on AI." But as you can tell from this webinar, I'm proud to be Canadian. I'm really proud that Cohere is headquartered in Toronto. We have offices in the UK and in the US as well, but Toronto is HQ. And I'm disheartened to let you know that Canada is behind. The US is far ahead. And this isn't in terms of training the models, it's actually an adoption of the models. And as we think about large enterprises and medium enterprises and small enterprises in Canada, the approach is much more of let's wait and see. Let's see what happens. This is new. This is evolving quickly. Yeah, like it's going to be relevant for us, but we don't need to make a big investment now. And what we're seeing a lot more from US companies is they say, this is mission critical. Not only are we not going to lose because of this, but we're going to go and win because of this. And yes, we might not have had the strongest AI track record up until this point, but this is an inflection point in terms of AI and what it can do. And we're going to go and win because of this. And if I used to lead Cohere's sales department, and if you would have brought me a company that was down the street from ours in Toronto, or that exact same company in the US, notwithstanding the massive advantage of being able to go over and have a coffee with them in person, I would still prefer to talk to the company in the US, because it was just so clear how much faster they were willing to move.
Really? Whoa. Whoa.
Well, listen, Jonathan, can't thank you enough. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Gwen, take us out, please. And thank you, Jonathan. Really appreciate it very
Thank you
much.
very, very much, Jonathan.
And it's so great to be here. Nick, Professor Beatty, I deeply appreciate what you're doing to educate folks on this technology and for all those of you who are here. So thank you so much for having me on today. It was a total pleasure.
Thanks, Jonathan. Where can people reach out to you and the team at Cohere?
Jonathan at cohere.com. Shoot me a note. Would love to hear from you. Don't hesitate.
So my name's Quinn Lawson, the developer, the community manager for the AI Tsunami, in partnership with David Beatty and Nicholas Darbo-Garno, the hosts here. This series is developed as an annual webinar series once per month as an almost moral imperative for senior leadership to rally and act on this generational opportunity. The next event is February 22nd with Carol Piovison. She'll be talking about the legal foundations of introducing LLMs into your organizations. Beyond beating the drum, providing access to the leaders and their insights like Jonathan, moving this space forward, educating the corporate governance world. David and Nicholas are readily available for individual board briefings on digital transformation, including AI. In addition to that, David is available for governance education, board evaluations, and chair advisory. Please reach out to me or to David, Nicholas, or Jonathan via the AI Tsunami channels. And thanks again for participating. Bring folks out. This is something we want to rally around. David, Nicholas, is there anything you would like to add?
No, we look forward to seeing you next time around. Thank you for coming.
Just do it. Just get started. Thanks so much.
Right. Yeah, Nick. Get her going.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.